Hello, my name is Tori Smith, and today is Tuesday, May 10th. Now, I'm kind of running behind in my child trafficking reports because I've been in jail for the last 4 days. What happened to me was I have been seeking justice for not just nationwide, but also here in the state of Indiana. Indiana has a major child trafficking location connected to the nationwide system. It's been open for 27 and a half years. And two of the men who are heavily involved in this are Indiana Attorney General Greg Zoeller and Indiana Governor Mike Pence. As of this moment, Mike Pence has murdered 50 children. Now, before I do the report on Indiana, what happened was that I've been in contact with the Indiana Attorney General's office several times. And the last time that I spoke with them, they told me that if I wanted this child trafficking operation shut down and criminal charges filed against Greg Zoeller and Mike Pence, that I needed to hire a private attorney. Okay, well, I didn't know what type of attorney. I worked for the Indiana State Fraternal Order Police for 17 years. And as a matter of fact, well, it should be obvious by now, but I work with some of the finest police and law enforcement officers ever. But I just don't announce that too often. And because people might say, gee, Tori, how do you get all this information? Well, I'm an evidence reader. I read evidence. I read DNA. I read evidence out of DNA, and I also read information out of evidence. Now, what happened to me was that first I went to a local police department called Columbia City Police Department. I'm not in their jurisdiction, and I asked them what kind of attorney I needed. They said, we have no idea. We've never heard of a private attorney filing criminal charges. Why don't you try the Whitley County Prosecutor's Office? So I went to the Whitley County Prosecutor's Office, and I explained to them that I wanted charges filed against, I wanted to file a complaint, and I wanted to file charges against Greg Zoeller, who's raped, well, at the time it was 17 children, now it's 18 children. But he's murdered 2 children, a 3-year-old Iraqi boy and a 7-year-old Mexican girl. I also told the prosecutor's office, 2 seemingly very nice women, local men that were also involved. Within 48 hours, I was in jail. They filed a $20,000 felony against me called public nuisance. I am being called a public nuisance because I want the children of being brought to Indiana, I want this stopped. I want the children who are being gang raped and murdered in the state of Indiana stopped, and for that, I'm being called a public nuisance. So why don't you just make your own decisions? But I'll tell you what, the Indiana State Police have now just murdered 8 more children. Mike Pence murdered 2 more children. This report is for Friday afternoon, which was what? The 6th of May. Nationwide, 274 children were brought to America by what? 3 sources. I'm sorry, I got this huge long list now, and they were distributed to 18 locations. Indianapolis was one of them, and the gang rape and murder party there was in the afternoon. And I've been doing the format of these reports because these are criminal reports. The problem is there's literally no one to file criminal reports to in the state of Indiana because all the police and law enforcement agencies, guess what they do? They protect the men who rape and murder children. So that's why I put them on YouTube. Why? I do it out of respect for the children. And we've had some huge breakthroughs over the weekend, and because every time I go out of in my astral body, I would be attacked and nearly murdered. So I haven't been able to travel astrally, but I went to heaven several times this weekend, and I'm able to travel again. Anyone that has more than 51% sacred light can go to heaven. You can go there with intent. Set your intent, and how the best way for you to will come to you. And let's go to Indianapolis now. 16 children were gang raped by a group of 21 males, a total of 46 times. And the problem was 54 men were supposed to show up, but the vibrations have gone up, and I checked one of the men who I don't like. His name is Jim Banks, and because he's very, very arrogant. All these men are extremely arrogant. That whole of, well, I'm so rich and powerful and famous that I can just kill a child and no one will be able to do anything about it. Well, I can bitch about it every day, can I? And more. I do a lot more than that, though. And but a lot of these men, in fact, matter of fact, I was reading Mr. Banks' DNA today and yesterday, and he didn't show up because he was terrified because people are putting videos about him on the internet talking about the children that had been murdered right after he raped them. And the CIA called him and said, if you don't show up next weekend, we're going to take your wives and children, and we're going to, do whatever with them. The same thing they always do to everybody else, gang rape them and murder them. So I went to the Temple of Mother God to specifically petition for the children of this family, because I don't think any child should be gang raped and murdered. I have been, and I don't think any child should be. Okay, now, all these children were choked to death, and there were 16 children, as I said. Number one was a 3-year-old girl from Argentina. She was raped a total of 17 times total, and what I'm saying is since the United States child trafficking agencies abducted her, these are the totals, because it was, I wrote this down, I forgot to, it was, I believe, AFRICOM, and I believe it was, normally I write this down, I should have checked, and let me go back and look. It was AFRICOM, the Air Force, and SOCOM. Okay, those were the three child trafficking agencies that brought these children in. And she was murdered by a man from the Indianapolis Municipal Police Department, which has a long history of raping and murdering children. Child number 2 was a 3-year-old Vietnamese girl. She was raped 118 times, and she was murdered by a man named Douglas G. Carter, who's called the superintendent of the Indiana State Police. He's the number 1 ranked Indiana State policeman. Number 3, a 3-year-old boy from Africa. He was raped 77 times total, and he was murdered by Indiana Governor Mike Pence. Number 4, a 4-year-old African boy. He was raped 64 times, and he was murdered by the one I call Indiana State Policeman number 2. So I don't know his name. They won't provide pictures for me so I can do positive IDs. And because names are sometimes difficult to pull out of people's DNA. At least the names have always been difficult for me. Child number 5 was a 4-year-old Vietnamese boy. He was raped 127 times, and he was murdered by a DARPA male who resides here in Indiana. And he's basically the caretaker for the Indianapolis MyLab child trafficking operation. It's operated by DARPA and the CIA. Okay, where were we? Child number 6 was a 4-year-old African girl. She was raped 41 times, and she was murdered by the CEO of Eli Lilly. His name is John Leitner. I can't really pronounce his name. But all you have to do is Google CEO of Eli Lilly if you want to see this bastard's picture. Child number 7, a 5-year-old African girl. Also, she was raped 46 times, also murdered by Mike Pence. Now, these were the 48th and 49th children that he murdered. He's murdered another child since then. That's a different report. Okay, child number 8, a 5-year-old Chinese girl. She was raped 132 times, and she was murdered by Indiana State Policeman number 5. Number 9, child number 9 was a 5-year-old girl, an Argentinian girl. And she was raped 42 times, and she was murdered by Indiana State Policeman number 7. Child number 10 is a 5-year-old African boy. He was raped 60 times, and he was also murdered by Douglas G. Carter, the Indiana State Police superintendent. He murdered 2, and Mike Pence murdered 2. Child number 11 was a 6-year-old Vietnamese girl. And she was raped 204 times. She was murdered by Indiana State Policeman number 4. Child number 12 was a 6-year-old Brazilian girl. She was raped 72 times, and she was murdered by CIA agent number 2. There's 2 CIA agents. The next one murdered a 6-year-old African girl. 6-year-old African girl who was raped 64 times, and she was murdered by CIA agent number 1. Now, CIA agent number 1 was in contact with the Whitley County prosecutor, and the CIA were the ones that orchestrated this arrest against me because they didn't want me to do what? They didn't want me to make any more of these videos. But this morning when I went to heaven about 3 a.m., I woke up and heaven said that I would be able to make 3 of these reports today. I'm so grateful because these children mean so much to me. I was with a group of 400,000 children in heaven over the weekend, and they had all been gang raped and murdered in this child trafficking organization. It just rips my guts out. And but the CIA agent told the Whitley County prosecutor, "Oh, you should have seen the smirk on his face. He was he just laughing at me when he walked by me." And the CIA agent said, quote unquote, "We want you to join an elite group of the finest men in Indiana." And I can't pronounce his name, what his name is, like Schlengelegger or Slashi Super whatever monster. But he said, of course, "Oh, yes, sir, I'll be right down." Of course, he doesn't know he's joined the child trafficking operation. But he'll soon find out. He will definitely soon find out. Child number 14 was a 7-year-old African girl, and she was raped 93 times, and she was murdered also by the Indiana State Police, the man I call number 3. Child number 15 was a 7-year-old girl, a Chinese girl. She was raped 221 times, and she was murdered by an Army general. Child number 16 was an 8-year-old African boy who was raped 63 times, and he was also murdered by the Indiana State Police, one I call number 6. Now, who attended this? Greg Zoeller attended this, Indiana Attorney General, and he raped the 5-year-old Argentinian girl. And let's see, there was a second man from the Indiana Attorney General's office, and he raped the 5-year-old African girl, and he also raped the 7-year-old African girl. There were 2 African girls that he raped. There were 3 men from the Air Force. Number 1 raped 6 children, number 2 raped 5 children, and number 3 raped 6 children. Now you might wonder like how a man could go in and rape 6 children. Well, they have so many different techniques. They can excite the glandular system, the adrenal glands, the endocrine system. They have this device, let's call it, that can give a man an extremely stiff erection basically until they turn it off. So they can have, and they've used this on me before, like before they raped me. And it's a big joke to them to sexually excite a man by giving him one of these very extremely stiff, it literally hurts, your penis is so hard. But they like to do that because they like to laugh at you then and say, well, look how much you enjoyed it. Well, they just used a weapon on you. But anyway, and then they also have drugs that they use on these men that they inject with the disease rate technology is what it's called. But a lot of them don't know they're being drugged. So in other words, they bring these men, what they do is they drug the children, they keep them in cages, they transport them around underground, and then they keep them in cages. And they're, of course, all drugged because when they murder these children, they don't like a child to be able to, do anything back. They don't want to be kicked by the child, so they always keep the drugs in these children, keep them pretty well sedated, so they're really easy to murder. They're almost always murdered by being choked to death, and they like the children to die at the same moment they ejaculate into, and they actually compete to see who gets to murder the children. So who are these children, you might say? Well, I selected 2 of them that were murdered here in Indiana. There's number 15, the 7-year-old Chinese girl who was raped 227 times. Now, she was raped 7 times in Indiana, and she was murdered by an Army general who works in the Pentagon, lives in that area. And this man has raped 216 children and murdered 77 of them in these Luciferian human sacrifices. Now, how does she get there? Well, the Chinese military go out and they call it, well, I call it harvesting children. But they make it a military sweep where they go out and they're basically selling the children to the United States. This is one of the reasons why it costs so much money. Okay, so these military men go out and they saw this adorable little child, and she was in the streets, and she was about 10 feet away from her mother. This was a horrible, vivid scene for me to watch, but I want you to understand how these children are taken. They snatched up the little girl, and what did the mother do? Of course, like any other loving mother, she would freak out. She freaked out, she started screaming, and she started crying, and another soldier went up and bam, hit her in the head with the butt of his rifle. Down she went, and they were gone. So I looked at this child, and what I got is, I'm hoping I pronounced her name right, but what I got was Emma. At first I thought it was Emma, but that's the American version, Emma. Okay, there was a flowering tree that was real close. Of course, we have flowering trees here in Indiana. They're all over. But there was a flowering tree close to where she lived. Little Emma liked to sit, this little 7-year-old girl liked to sit under this flowering tree with a couple of her little dolls. and I could vividly see her, and she liked to play have soup with her dolls. And she would hold the cups, this little plastic cup, and she would, with 4 fingers, she would drink soup out of this, and then of course the dollies, make believe, they would drink soup with her. And but she loved to pretend to have soup midday with her little dollies. And this girl, for that horrible crime of sitting under the flower tree, she was raped by Chinese military, 4 corporate executives in China, 2 Chinese politicians, and then she was raped by the Air Force, and then she was gang raped and murdered here in Indianapolis. Well, I'm not in Indianapolis. I mean here at the Indiana child trafficking operation. I'm up north, thank God. Anyway, another child number 11, a 6-year-old Vietnamese girl. She was raped 204 times. And she was raped, I'm sorry, I can't read that. I have to probably, not 38 times. She was raped 3 times in Indianapolis. Let me pull up that girl's DNA, please. A 6-year-old, number 11, 6-year-old Vietnamese girl. Yeah, she was raped 3 times in Indy. 204 times total, 3 times in Indy. And she was murdered by Indiana State Policeman number 4. And he has raped a total of 86 children and murdered 12 of them in this Luciferian human sacrifice operation. And she's another girl that was taken from the same area. Her parents had moved to this place from Vietnam. They had lived there for about 12 years, and they went there because of work. The father was offered a really good job. The mother thought it was a good area for them to go to in China. And then the mother, got a job, and she started working too. So they were basically a really happy, loving family. And this little girl was pretty. She had jet black hair. It was beautiful. And it was just about an inch below her ear. And I probably a lot of us have seen these little Chinese and Asian girls, how they have black hair. It's normally very straight. I think it used to be called a bob cut, but that might not be exactly it. Where it's pretty much straight around. Sometimes it's cut in a little bit of an angle. But her hair was pretty much straight all the way around. Beautiful little child. I wish you could see her face. Well, eventually you will when you get back to heaven and you see the evidence. And she loved to wear very simple dresses, but very brightly colored ones. Almost all of her dresses, just real simple dresses, like we in America, the women have a simple black dress, what they call it. But she only liked really brightly colored ones. She liked to wear pink ones and yellow ones and, really nice blue ones. And when it came to bedtime, she liked to sing a song to her parents. And every night before, they would go to bed, her parents would go in, and she would sing this little song to her parents because she loved them very much. And she was also raped by the military, some businessmen, and then given to the Air Force, sold to the Air Force, and then brought to America where she was raped some more, and then she was brought to Indianapolis, Indiana, My Lab child trafficking operation, where she was gang raped and then murdered. Thank you. This has been the report for the Indianapolis My Lab child trafficking operation for Friday, the 6th of May. Thank you.